Thanks for tuning in for one of our Sunday messages. At Red, we're continuing to lean into our vision of being a church of passionate and committed disciples who are devoted to Jesus' alternative for the world. If you're inspired or encouraged by the ministry of our church, we'd love to have you join us. You can find out more at redchurch.au.
Yeah, I am married to one woman, and we have one child, Mackenzie, but Kenzie is what she goes by. And when Kenzie was young in the States, we had this option. We had moved to a suburb that offered one school that offered dual language, meaning that half of her day would be taught in Spanish and half would be taught in English. They took 25 native Spanish speakers and 25 native English speakers, put them all into one class, kind of jumbled them up, split them in half, and you would have two teachers that each taught 25 kids at one time. So you would spend maybe half your day learning like maths and science and social studies in English for like 3 weeks, while the other class learned it in Spanish. And then you would switch for another 3 weeks. So one teacher only taught in Spanish, one teacher only taught in English. Miss Alma happened to be her year one teacher. And Miss Alma was the Spanish-speaking teacher. And their classroom was not in the main building. It was in a portable building. And so, because there was too many kids in the school. And one day, our first grade daughter comes home angry. Like, she's just angry. And her mom's like, babe, what's going on? And she's like, Miss Alma speaks English. And you're like, okay, that's true. What happened? And she goes, well, the phone rang in our classroom from the office. The office called down. And she talked to them in English, like good English. Like, she really spoke English well, right? And my wife's like, well, yeah, but she's trying to teach you Spanish. And she's like, no, she's trying to teach me maths. And I learned better in English. Like, she should teach me in English because that's what she's trying to teach me. And so, right, she was right. She does learn better in maths, in English. But her mom and I had a hope for her of a preferred outcome. We were like, man, this would be so good if you were able to speak two languages. She did not carry that hope internally as a year one. And even if she agreed that it was maybe good, she didn't necessarily have the desire to go along with it. And if I'm honest, it's sometimes hard for me to pursue things that I know are good. I suffer from what doctors call a lack of discipline. And it's been diagnosed. And I know that I need to go to the gym. Like, I totally know that. And I've completed step 1. I bought a gym membership. I even completed step 2. I went there and got my picture taken. Now, step 3, right? Like, step 3 is coming. I don't want to rush into it and pull something. So, but even in my head, even though I know I actually have a medical condition that would actually be really helpful if I worked out, and even though I know that, in my head, I begin to bargain with myself, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, I might not work out today, but what if I eat better? And then as I get close to a mealtime, I'm like, okay, what if I don't eat better? What if I don't eat just as bad as I often do, right? Like, what if I cut my Oreo intake by 50%? Like, that seems like a really healthy choice, right? So maybe you have that similar lack of discipline around something, but for others of us, sometimes it's hard to pursue something even if we know it's good, because quite honestly, sometimes life can just punch us in the face. Sometimes we have hopes and dreams. Sometimes we arc our trajectory at something, and then something just outside of our control comes at us. Something hard. And sometimes it's just the fact that some of our dreams, some of our hopes, some of the things we desire, they just take forever. You just keep going and you're like, man, is this worth it? Is this worth it? And we lose our reason why. And I've been in ministry a long time, and I've seen this happen with people's faith. They live a life of faith. I've seen people who are, like, you would describe them maybe as like white hot, like passionate, just all in. And then over time, it just begins to dampen. it just begins to shut down. And eventually, sometimes, some of them, they no longer have faith at all. And it's almost always a gradual cooling off. And I think it's because sometimes it's that a life of faith doesn't look exactly what they thought it would look like. And their life, the details, the mundaneness of it, begins to choke out that white-hot faith that they were experiencing. And this isn't a new phenomenon. In fact, the Bible is full of examples. And Jesus tells a story where statistically, it's actually more likely for our faith to get choked out than it is for it to remain white-hot. And so for people who would want a life of faith, it begs that question, how do we keep our faith going? How do we keep that fire stoked? And I think part of the answer can be found in the book of Hebrews. It's in the New Testament. It's a letter written to a group of people. And the book of Hebrews is interesting in that it's written to a persecuted people. It's written to a bunch of people who proclaim a faith in Jesus, and because of that, they're suffering some financial persecution, they're suffering some social persecution, and in fact, they're beginning to see people die because of their faith. And the author is writing into the midst of that and reminding them of why their life of faith matters. And so it begs this question for them: is this life of faith worth it? Is a life of faith worth my life? And I think it's the same question that it would beg of us. And the author's answer is a resounding yes. It is totally worth it. If Jesus was real, and if the things that he promised were true, then it began to usher in a new and unseen reality. And if that reality is true for them and it's true for us, then it redefines the experience of our lives. We're going to pick up in chapter 10, verse 39. It says this: "But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved." So again, the author is writing out of this premise that there's a new and unseen reality. But notice that what is actually happening, the author turns on its head. Because what is actually happening in the Hebrews, in the intended audience's experience, what is actually happening is that when people shrink back and no longer live a life of faith, they live. They are saved. And when people choose to live a life of faith, they're being destroyed. And the author is saying, hey, I get that. I get that that's what you see. But in an actual reality, what happens is those who choose to live a life of faith, they are being saved. There's something unseen that is happening. And then, if you were to read the book of Hebrews, it actually doesn't read as much like a letter as it does like a sermon. And man, you're in chapter 10. The sermon is rolling at this point. Does that make sense? It's, again, I come from the United States, and one of the faith traditions I appreciate the most is kind of this black church in the United States gospel kind of place. And if you've ever had the chance to see a black American pastor get going, oh, it is a beautiful thing, right? And just Jesus, you are glorified because we are sanctified and we are now justified. It's like Hebrews kind of has that mentality behind it. And you're in chapter 10 and they've just rolling, and all of a sudden the author hits pause. From this verse, right, where he brings up faith, they hit pause and they begin to explore, well, what is faith? What is it to live a life of faith? And it makes me ask the question, why? If you have all this momentum, if you've been making this case, if you're going, why take an entire chapter to explain and give examples of what faith is? And I think it's because the author knew that their audience was tempted, like I am, to make their life of faith less, to turn it down, to just back off just a little bit in the face of persecution. To say, it's not quite that. It doesn't have to be that intense. And the author seems to be writing and saying, it's actually more. Our life of faith is bigger. Our life of faith is grander. Our life of faith is more intense than you know. And so it makes me ask the question, what does a life of faith look like? How would I know a life of faith? Because that's what happens in chapter 11, is the author begins to tell all of these stories, showing what a life of faith is. So I think the question, what does a life of faith look like? I came up with a couple conclusions. There's far more, but there's just a couple. A life of faith looks, first of all, a life of faith looks ridiculous. It's true. A life of faith looks ridiculous. Not like dumb. Not like, when I come out getting ready for work or something, my wife's like, are you really going to wear that? That looks ridiculous, right? Like that, not that kind of ridiculous, but more of it makes no sense unless an unseen reality is true. It makes no sense. And the stories of faith that you read, they don't go the way that you would expect. They don't end the way we think they might. Hebrews 11:1, the author continues, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. We could unpack that all night long, but one of the things I'll give you, one of the reasons it looks ridiculous is that faith is not just about belief. And so for the next 30 verses, the author begins to recount to them a shared history that all of them would know, and begins to just briefly mention stories that would trigger for them, oh yeah, like remember this person. They're like, oh yeah, I know that story. Remember this person. Oh yeah, I know that story. And the author begins to remind them of what faith looks like. But we're going to jump all the way, because it's just like this whole litany, just boom, boom, boom. We're going to jump all the way to verse 32. So again, the author's been going super minorly, like over each person, right? But naming people by specific names. And then in verse 32, we pick it up and it says, and what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. The stories that the author's writing about all seem to point to this fact, that faith is a life lived, not a life believed. It is action based on belief, but not proof. I was watching as people came in and sat down, and none of you came in and pushed on your chair and put your foot on it. We're like, okay, is this gonna hold me? None of you did that. You all just sat down. Because you had a belief that your chair was going to hold you. When I was in school, primary school, the desks we had, they had 4 legs. It was like the chair had 2 legs on the back, and then it was attached to the desk part that had 2 legs on the front with this bar right here. And people in my school had faith that when you sat in them, they would hold you. And so my friend and I would exploit that faith. And he would grab the front and I would grab the chair, and we'd pull until the bolts broke. And then we would put it so that it looked normal. And then somebody would come and slide into their seat and sit down, and it would just collapse and pinch their legs so they couldn't get out. They were trapped in this desk, and their body weight was pushing it down more and more. And all they could do is, because it began to hurt, they'd have to turn on their side and knock the whole desk over. I destroyed the faith that a lot of my classmates had in chairs. You see, all of the stories that the author tells are based on faith. They are based on the fact, if you go back and you look at all the stories that the author tells in chapter 11, they are all based on the fact that God shows up. Any story in the Bible is absolutely ridiculous if God doesn't show up. Moses, being chased by Pharaoh's army, gets to the Red Sea, holds his staff out, and nothing happens. And Pharaoh catches him and they die. Joshua marches around the walls of Jericho, and on the seventh day they march 7 times, and then they scream and nothing happens. And then they die. Jesus goes to the cross and is crucified and is dead and is buried, and nothing happens. It is an act of God that makes a story of faith not ridiculous. A life of faith, if I'm really honest, even if you look at the stories in these verses, right, shuts the mouths of lions. It means you have to be near some lions. Quenches the flames. It probably means I'm about to be set on fire. It's a ridiculous moment. Faith is absolutely fine if what we're talking about is chairs. But if you're talking about the edge of a sword coming at me, all of a sudden it looks really crazy. The second conclusion, I think, is found in the end of this particular passage. So we read from 32 to 35, but I cut 35 in half because 35 begins, if we just read it, it begins like this: women receive back their dead. So you get this sense of like, man, there's some momentum. Like, these are cool stories, like, right? Like quenching fire and administering justice and conquering kingdoms. Let's go. Women receive back their dead. Yeah, raised to life again. That's right. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. I have no idea what that means. I think any resurrection is awesome, but yours was better. Like, I don't know how it's a better one, right? Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. The second thing I think we see if we look at a life of faith is that it's risky. Not only does a life of faith demand that we put ourselves in places where God has to show up, but it also seems like it may not always end well. Faith is not about knowing the outcome. But the author knew that the people reading his letter were tempted, much like we are, to believe that if God calls me to it, it has to turn out well, as defined by me. And quite honestly, Scripture does not back that argument up. It often seems to go directly against it. That a life of faith seems not to be based on whether it turns out well or not. And Jesus' life, right? He led his life in such a way that it ended up taking him to the cross. And then he has the audacity to turn to his closest followers and say, I want you to take up your cross and follow me. All the way to death, if need be. I think one of the things I appreciate most about Jesus is that he doesn't sugarcoat what a life of following him looks like. So a life of faith is ridiculous and risky. So it leaves us with the question, so why bother doing it? And for me, that answer is found in John 10:10. I have come that they might have life, Jesus speaking. I have come that they might have life and have it to the fullest. Or as one author translates it, might have the best possible life. I didn't grow up in a house of faith. I was a non-Christian until I was 18, went to uni 2 weeks later. And I remember seeing this verse pretty early on in my walk with Jesus. And I had a conversation with Jesus that involved me basically saying, hey, I have a pretty vivid imagination of what the best possible life might look like. And if I ever find out that you were lying, I'm out. And I'm going to take as many people with me as I possibly can. And I felt like maybe the Lord said to me, that's fine. But until that time, you have to lean in. Cool. And so I began to lean in, and I can tell you that was 31 years ago. I've never found him to be a liar. But I have found that he calls me to trust him even when everything around me is chaotic. And I have found that he calls me to trust him even when he looks really unwise. I believe that in the chaos of this world, his call to me has brought peace and has brought wisdom and has brought internal order. I believe that a life of faith is a beautiful life. I believe it's the most beautiful life that we can have. And I believe that it is based on an unseen reality. A reality where the outcomes are sometimes the opposite of what we might expect. I remember when my daughter was about 1, I think, and life was life. I don't know. It was kind of mundane, just kind of going through the grind. I don't know. I was just kind of going. And my pastor, the church we were at, we often prayed for one another, heard words for one another. And so my pastor, we go out for coffee and he goes, hey man, I've been praying for you. So it's not an abnormal thing that he was like, I've been praying for you and I think I heard a word from the Lord. I was like, oh yeah. And he goes, I know, he knew my boss, and he goes, I know the people who are kind of your supervisors. And he says, I think the Lord wants to draw out of you some new gifts and some new things, but I don't think you have a mentor that can help do that because they're not gifted and called the way you are. And so can you think of anybody who might have a similar gift set to you that's in your organization? I worked for a parachurch organization. And I was like, I don't know. And he goes, well, think of somebody who, if you had to live their life, it would be okay. You might not be called to live their life, but if you had to, you'd be like, okay, that's okay. And I was like, okay. One time I was at a conference and I heard a speaker, him. And he goes, do you know him? And I was like, I had dinner with him along with 8 other people at, this big table. And he's like, okay, why don't you and your wife and your 1-year-old daughter, see if you can just go live with him for a while. And I was like, because he lives in Florida, which is kind of like saying he lives in Perth. Like, it's that far away. Like, you're like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. He's like, man, I just feel like it might be something the Lord has for you. I just want you to think about it. So it like stirred me, and I was like, oh my gosh, all right. Like, but you have to understand, I had a 1-year-old daughter and had a wife that was not very excited about change in general. And so she's amazing, by the way, but it just the reality was she just wasn't excited about change in general, right? And so I'm just like, okay. So I'm like, I go home that day, and she's like, hey, let's go for a walk around this lake that's nearby our house, about 1.5 kilometers around. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, but I was like, but you have to let me talk, and you can't talk until I'm done talking. And then you can ask any question you want. And I just kind of like verbally threw up, right? I'm just like, blah, blah, blah. And then Jay said this, and I don't know, and blah, 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 and I'm just like, I don't know, life just seems like life, and I don't know, and da, da, da. And we get done, and she lets me talk, and I'm like, I don't, and I was like, I know you're going to hate this idea, but, maybe we should ask this guy if we can come live with him, which I don't know if you've put that part of the story together yet. I don't know this guy very well. How does that go, right? And so, and I know, I'm thankful to the Lord that I know how my wife's going to respond, right? Like, you know how that goes, right? You have the conversation before you have the conversation. Except that she didn't hold her end of the bargain up, right? So we have the conversation, and I'm waiting. I know, right, that she's going to be like, are you an idiot? Like, we can't move to Florida. And she looks at me and she goes, Ryan, your ministry, and I'm like, yeah, is so boring. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, what? And she's like, I don't care what we do, but something has to change. Because this is not what following Jesus is supposed to look like. Right? Deep offense, right? But you have to understand, like, I had to then have conversations with like friends of mine. What are you doing? I don't know. I think I'm going to try to email this guy I met one time and see if we can go live with them for a while. So I did. I emailed him, and I'm like, hey, man, you don't remember me, but we had dinner at this conference, and I was wondering if my wife and my 1-year-old and I can come live with you. And he emails back, and he goes, hey, man, I'm on sabbatical for the next 6 months planting churches in Manila amongst the poorest of the poor. Can I get back to you? Sure. And then he did, right? And he got back to me and he goes, hey man, I talked to my community and it'd be great. Part of what you need to know is that he lived in the inner city of Tampa, which is a real inner city, like gangs and violence and all the things. But he lived there intentionally, and he lived in community. So they bought this old abandoned house that was beat up and broken down. Him and his wife and their 5 kids moved in, and then 3 single women moved upstairs. And then there was a mother-in-law in the back where the married couple with their 1-year-old lived. And then there was another couple with their 4 kids, but they couldn't fit in the house, so they lived just kind of around the corner. And there was another couple with their kid that also were part of the community that lived in the house. And then they were like, hey, there's this room that you can have that's in the mother-in-law, you and your wife and this kid. Come be a part of our community for a while. And I remember going and thinking, what am I doing, God? All I knew was that it seemed like God wanted us to go. That's it. And that our community was like, yeah, this seems right. It's like, what are we doing? And then, if you've ever traveled with a 1-year-old, we got delayed in an airport for hours and hours. And I remember flying that night. We finally get on the plane to go, and I look over, and my wife and my daughter, who cried and cried and cried, they're passed out. And I'm just thinking, Lord, what are you doing? I'm an idiot. And the truth is, I brought absolutely zero significance to that community. Like, it's not like I went there and I was like, there was this defining moment where the clouds parted. And yet, we lived there for about 6 weeks. They invited us into their community. We just lived life with them. And we would both say that was a defining moment for us. But it wasn't like one moment. But it changed the trajectory of who we were. It allowed us to see God in new ways, even if it felt crazy to try and explain it to people. Why did you go live there? I don't know. It felt like we were supposed to. What'd you do? No, not a lot. Just kind of follow this guy around. Right? And yet, it felt like what the Lord brought me in the midst of that chaos was peace. What he brought me in the midst of what felt like stupidity was wisdom. How then do we live a life of faith? How do we do it? I think the answer is found in the following section, chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. I'm going to jump to verse 2, which says, the end of verse 1 into 2. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. Keep our eyes on Jesus. There are so many things that demand your attention. Some of you are students. Some of you have jobs. Some of you are in relationships. Some of you are in the midst of pain. Some of you are in the midst of sorrow. There are so many things that will grab at us. And the temptation becomes, how do I be this and follow Jesus? How do I be a good employee and follow Jesus? How do I be a student and follow Jesus? How do I be a spouse? How do I be a friend? How do I be a sibling and follow Jesus? And I think the author would encourage us to flip those around, keep our eyes on Jesus first. How do I follow Jesus and be a good employee? How do I follow Jesus and be a good spouse? How do I follow Jesus and be a good student? I think the order matters. Because when we get the order out of order, I think it begins to turn down the intensity of our faith. And so if we're here tonight and you would say you follow Jesus, my prayer for you is that you would keep going. That you would take the opportunities and say yes. Whenever there's an opportunity, say yes. If you feel like the Lord is putting something before you, say yes. I remember that my wife and I went, and the organization I work for offered a class on healing prayer. And so we signed up for it. It was a 5-day class. We flew to it. We're there. And I was like, I believe in holy prayer, in healing prayer, sort of. Like that was where I was landing, right? And so, but I was like, but I think it's in the Bible and I think it's true. So let's lean into this a little bit. And so we get there and we're there. And at one point they teach us how to pray and they're like, all right, you know what? Day 3, you know what we should do is we should try it out. Does anyone have anything medically wrong with them right now, right? This woman raises her hand. She's like, I'm a runner, but I haven't been able to run for months because my knee, I can't even really bend it and put a lot of weight on it. It hurts really bad. Great. Does anyone want to, in front of the whole room of 35 people, want to pray for this woman to be healed? And I was like, no. But if God's going to show up, I want to be there. So I raised my hand. They're like, Ryan, great. I was the only one, by the way. It's not like I was fighting people. I was like, finally, someone. Ryan, come up. Do you remember, okay, this is how you pray. Do the thing, okay? And I'll be honest with you. I was just like, this is not going to work because I'm broken. So I pray for her. I was right. It did not work. And the woman who was helping co-lead the class, she goes, well, Ryan, how were you feeling when you were praying? I was like, oh, that's a dumb question. I didn't say that part. I said, well, I kind of knew it wasn't going to work. And she's like, why? And in a lot of words, because why use 2 words when you can use 1,000? I said, I'm broken. And she goes, oh, great. Let's pray for you. So then they gathered around, prayed for me, and then she's like, now you pray for her. So I prayed for her. And she began running around the room, doing deep squats, faking that she was healed. No, I'll be honest, that's the cynicism of my heart, right? The cynicism of my heart is like, don't do that. You're still hurt. Like, I don't understand. And yet, I got to be there in that moment. I've prayed for a lot of people to be healed since then, and like a couple people felt minorly better. Like, honestly. But I got to be there when God showed up. And the truth of faith, in my experience, is God never does a miracle so big that it doesn't take faith, believe, a little bit of hope on my part to believe that he showed up. Even in that moment, I was like, this probably wasn't God. She just stretched real good. Just being honest with you. Every miracle in the scriptures takes faith on people's part, right? Jesus get baptized. God speaks. He goes, this is my son with whom I'm well pleased. People are like, what weird thunder? Cool. Right? Acts. They start speaking every tongue known to man. They must be drunk. Yeah, that's a common side effect of being drunk, is becoming fluent in a language you do not know. It takes faith. And so if you're here tonight and you follow Jesus, keep saying yes. I beg you to keep saying yes, because I skipped 2 verses intentionally, but in the end of chapter 11 ends this way. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. That verse has a lot of deep theology to it, but part of what I would take from it is your act of faith, your life of faith is often not for you. It's for me. And my life of faith is for you. We need each other's faith. We need each other's life of faith to keep going. We need to be able to tell the stories the way that the author tells the stories. What if our community could write Hebrews chapter 11 about our community? I do not have time to tell you about Liam and Ashley. I wish I had time to tell you about Gabby. Let me tell you about Sip and Danny. What if these were our stories? And they don't have to be these giant, complex stories. What if they were just us living little lives of faith that turn into ridiculous stories? I'm going to invite the worship team up. My daughter is so thankful that she's fluent in Spanish. She really is. She is so thankful. But that first year, it was a struggle. She brought home a poem about a caterpillar written in Spanish and was like, Dad, help me. I did not know the word for caterpillar in Spanish, oruga. And so it was a rough year. We didn't know if she was going to make it. We didn't know if we were going to make it. And I really did want her to learn maths. And she did, eventually. But her and her mom and I, we really perceived that there was something better for her. But it was hard. I think God feels the same way about you and I. That there is an unseen reality that is better. It is so good. And his invitation to us is, will we continually keep saying yes, not for one moment in time, but over and over and over? Will we be a community of people that say yes to him?